Hey, how's it going? It is Bryce again, and I just want to take you guys through my part of the services and the programs that are offered at the Integrated Learning Annex. So, for those of you that are interested, I'm focused primarily on the intersection between psychology or the mind, business, and groups of people coming together. And so the frameworks that I use, I've developed what I call a generic systems framework. That's what I've introduced in contemporary leadership for those that were able to participate. And the reason why I chose a generic framework is that by coming up with something that is more or less vague, we're actually able to append a lot of detail to it. And they're not details that are specific towards any group of people or any generation or any sort of demographic consideration, as much as it can be applied across the board. And that was important for me because of the work that I do. I find myself on Monday being at a school district, on Tuesday being with some people that work in the private sector, and then I'll find myself on the phone with an insurance adjuster, and I have to make sure that I know how to navigate every single world that I'm in. So what does that mean for TiLA? What it means is when I teach my courses, I try to teach from a position that is inherently or intrinsically transdisciplinary. I want people to understand that I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not just a business manager. I'm a number of different things, and I pull from a bunch of different worlds in order to make sense of the scenario that confronts us. So of the 10 general concerns that I think TiLA can address, my come in as communication. So number one, the most important part of any team, whether it's a business unit, an organization at large, a community, is how information flows. In my generic strategy that I developed earlier this year, I discuss when I go in and I do an analysis or a synthesis of a system, I go in and I like to look at what I call information quality and how much the information that is embedded within that particular system, so that's within your team. It's even better when you can get a number of different teams and that you can see how the information flows from an organizational level. Communication is everything because that's primarily how we exchange information. So what TiLA does, as far as the communication side is concerned, we help you understand your team, number one, because personalities, cognitive abilities, memory, all these things come into play when you're talking about how people communicate. Some people are fantastic at visual communication. One of the first lessons I learned when I was interning for Dr. Conover is that, if you're a coach, it's a fantastic way for you to up the ante or just improve a player astronomically is to understand how that player interfaces with information. Is he a visual learner or is he a verbal learner? And the truth is, if you've spent any time with a kid trying to yell at him about what to do, sometimes you just need to draw it out. You need to draw the play out, and it ends up being that much more successful. So that's communication. It's a very important part to me because I find myself to be very communication-centric. Excuse me, I can't talk. I can't communicate. I talk a lot, and I like to express, and I'm very gregarious in the way that I express. I'm very my personality kind of can run overboard, and so I have to make sure that I'm constantly explaining what's going on, and I like people to all be on the same page. My number two are sustainable strategies. So when I first got into the professional world, I was actually very interested in management consulting, and I worked on small business consulting for the first few years that I was out of college. And ultimately what brought me to the clinic is that I wanted to understand the psychologies of my clients and of my colleagues. And when we're talking about creating sustainable strategies, and this is probably number one on my list, I just kind of jotted them down, but this is the most important thing to me. When you're sitting with a team of managers, okay, a team of executives, a team of directors, these are very, very intelligent, very, very capable, and just generally very successful people, or people who are ambitious enough to want to get success. And I, as an educator, as a consultant, I can't tell you how to run GE. I can't tell you how to run your nonprofit. I can't tell you how to run your business unit better. But what I can do is we can sit together, and this is what I like to do on the one-on-one meetings. Once we identify what exactly you're trying to create, your strategies need to be able to conform to the demographies that you're reaching out to. So in other words, so many managers get in the habit of creating strategies that make sense when you're applying it from an internal perspective. When it's you and your colleagues, your peers, getting together, discussing how the world works, that's one way, that's one view, that's one perspective, one perception. What ends up happening is you get blindsided in the marketplace by all of the different things happening, especially when we get down to my number 5 on this list of social complexity. But when you're discussing how to compete in the marketplace, if you don't have a good, working, flexible strategy about how you're going to deal with the different people that you're dealing with, whether it's a competitor or a consumer or a regulator or anything of that nature, you're going to find yourself in hot water. So when I'm talking about sustainable strategies, I mean, how do we create something that is socially responsible, that is, that it reaches to a number of different demographics and topographies, and how do we get that to translate over time? How does it become a dynamic strategy? What does it mean in 15, 20, 25, however many years out? How is society going to change? All right, of course, we're shooting in the dark there, but that's the stuff that I enjoy doing. So when I get into business simulation, I oftentimes get into geopolicy and geostrategy, because when you look at things happening on a large scale level, hemispheric level, or at the least a continental level, and you watch all the different groups interact, you get a lot of insight about how you can be a better person or a better manager, even if you only work for, a 10 or 15 person company like SoCal Neuropsych. Critical skills. This is applied to the first two. So I actually consider, when I say critical skills, I'm talking about both critical thinking and critical communication. Sustainable strategies falls into critical thinking, and then of course the communication, my number 1 point, is critical communication. What that means is, once you start to understand the dynamics of the locations where you find yourself doing business, or just the location where you find yourself competing, it's important that you start to develop the ability to think through all of the permutations, combinations, extant possibilities, the potentialities, the eventualities, and you have to be able to attack those from a number of different levels. When we talk about analysis, right, we're talking about the nuts and bolts, the ones and the zeros, the numbers. Yeah, we can do that, and that's what I meant by most managers are capable of doing that. It's when we get into the soft synthesis portion. Synthesis is where you have multiple people coming together who are very good at the analysis. And what ends up happening is, when you go from planning to implementation or planning to execution phases, what ends up happening is generally critical skills begin to diminish by a bit. And all of a sudden it becomes, well, this is how I've done things in the past, this is what I've seen work, and no longer are you really operating within a framework that's going to promote organizational learning as much as it's going to promote your particular mission or campaign or agenda, whatever the situation may be. So when we talk about critical skills, we talk about how to communicate your ideas, how to integrate someone else's ideas, and of course how to do all of that with reference to the social complexity you find yourself in. Those 3 things lead into leadership development. When I discuss what it means to be a leader, and I use my generic systems framework, what I'm saying is that leaders tend to be in a position where the decision that they make or the actions that they take have an outsized, almost disproportionate response in the system around them than what was to be anticipated. And what that means is that leadership isn't a thing as much as it's a relational structure of a person within an environment. And as a relational structure, it can be transient. That means at one moment, you may not consider yourself to be a leader, but you'll be in a leadership position. And that could be helping a little old lady across the street, or it could be, leading your company out of a bad quarter. All of those are a part of what it takes to be a leader. Now, when we get into leader in a specific niched business context, then we have to take in a few more things into consideration, and that's what TiLA really walks you through. How to deal with your direct reports, how to deal with those who are you reporting to, what are their personalities like, how do they communicate, what are their past experiences. It's a big one for me. What have you been through that brings you to this moment? All of those are critical elements. If you want to be a successful leader, you must understand the context, and then you must understand the dynamics and the relational structures that are also at play, because that's going to make or break the decisions that you make. My number 5, and like I said, these are the 5 things that I really hone in on: social complexity. Being an African American, being a young African American, and competing in this space has been both a blessing and it's been a learning experience. The blessing is that most people aren't used to seeing people like me, and so at the very least, I'm unforgettable. The learning experience, of course, has to deal with just being young and being black and having to make my way through a lot of these historically segregated industries and sectors, I've had to learn a lot on the fly. And I think that dealing with social complexity, really, the reason why I put it number 5 is it gels all the first 4. It gels, if you're able to understand social complexity, you can communicate it. You can come up with a good strategy for it. You can come up with thinking strategies and meaning maps and all the other implementations and tools that I like to use. And then you develop yourself as a leader, and then all of a sudden you're able to deal with someone regardless of sexual orientation, gender, age, where in the region they're from, where in the particular city they're from, because, you know, places like LA, you can really be from a mile away from each other and live in 2 completely different worlds. So with that stated, that's my contribution to TiLA. So when you get involved in the Bryce projects, which I run integrated management strategy, and I run innovation and mindfulness or creativity, when you get into these programs, that's what we're going over. We're thinking about new ways to think about things that we do every single day, the things that you are darn good at. I want to help put some additional structures in there so you can be even better at it. So I really look forward to you guys working with me. I run weekly sessions. I actually have stuff that happens on a daily basis. I have blogs. I have downloadables. I have the whole gamut. There's going to be plenty of videos and webinars and things of that nature. So I hope that you can get involved in any way that you possibly can. There are very low rates that you can do from just a virtual if you want the downloadables and you want to get information sent via email. That's one way to do it. And then if you want to come in person, especially if your company wants to come and work with us, we give you a group rate and you're able to pick and choose your programming accordingly. So as I've been saying, I really look forward to those of you that are going to participate. For those of you that have sent your well wishes and said that you're really excited for what we got going on, thank you so much. This is only the beginning. We're just getting things going, and you're going to see a lot of these videos pop up, and I hope that everybody can get in where they fit in, and let's have a really successful 2016.